let's begin with the optimism that the workers have shared. That yes, today is like when your dad travels and you're waiting that when he returns, he's going to buy you something. They've been asking for something. We'll not go deep into that. We'll leave that for later. But just the optimism and the hope that they have for today.
Uh, First, today is set aside to celebrate workers across the world. Is that essentially an International Workers' Day called Workers' Day or May Day. So, workers across the globe are being celebrated today in terms of the workers' rights, in terms of their safety in the workplace, and all other elements that make the workforce to be happy. But then maybe as we progress in this conversation, we'll be able to speak to specific issues as it relates to the workforce and some of the challenges, hopes and aspiration, and the prospects in terms of, like the report just put it, prospect for a new minimum wage that is being canvassed currently. But if you look at the economic challenge and reality of today, some of those expectations may not really be met either by the government or by the private sector, because even the private sector and the government is highly challenged in terms of productivity, and they able to pay the kind of expectations. Anyway, it's a day of celebration, so don't let's dwell more on the wage. The other issues that has to do with workforce beyond the money or monetary value that the workers expect.
All right. The focus of our conversation for today, as regards the welfare of Nigerian workers. When we talk about welfare, we talk about the well-being of Nigerian workers. But I would like you to give a scorecard of the disposition or how government has prioritized the welfare of Nigerian workers. And you know, when we talk about workers, both in the public sector and also in the private sector. So how would the scorecard look like if you are to assess the priority being given to the welfare of workers in Nigeria, looking at the government side, then on the part of employers?
On the government side, I may not be able to speak to that in details because I don't work in the public service. But then if you do a media scan of the expectations from the government side, I think it's a mixed bag. I think the government, to a very large extent, when you talk about welfare, has not really done very well. And the welfare here does not really mean monetary value. What other non-financial benefit that goes to the workforce? To what extent are you able to sustain public transportation, social housing? If you look at it from that perspective, I think there's much to be done on the public sector. On the other side of the coin, if you look at the private sector, yes, there are high level of welfare in the private sector, depending on the level in terms of your contribution to that particular organization. But welfare, yes, more sustainable in the private sector because you are essentially paid based on your contribution to the bottom line of the company. So once the bottom lines are okay from the company perspective, then you have a salary increase or wage increase and other welfare package that you can negotiate. But from industrial relation point of view, you have what we call collective bargaining, even in the public sector, particularly in a trade union environment where every year you're supposed to come in on the table to discuss wage increase, which is constitutionally guaranteed for improvement in terms of salaries, in terms of the package. So, but if you make a comparison between the private and the public sector, I think the private sector has done better than government. But government, on the other hand, must find a way to scale up social housing, public transportation, so that can help where the minimum wage really cannot really take people to the market. But when you provide this welfare package to your workforce, then that will be able to ameliorate the negative impact on the the lane salary, so to speak, that people collect. I think the minimum wage really is a far cry to the current reality in the marketplace.
All right, let's continue looking at the public sector versus the private sector. Now, the Minister of Interior, Tunjunju, while he conveyed the declaration of the federal government making today a public holiday, emphasized the importance of efficiency and, of course, excellence. Now, looking at the public sector and the private sector regarding the input of Nigerian workers, what can you say when it comes to excellence and when it comes to efficiency? What should we focus on today to change the narrative?
I think I'm afraid to really comment on that. When you talk about efficiency in the public sector, I think there's a major challenge. And the reason is not far-fetched because of the bureaucratic nature of how the public service is configured. When you really talk about efficiency, in service delivery, I think the public sector in Nigeria in particular is far from the park, because when you look at access to service delivery from government department, it leaves much to be desired. So the minister making that statement, either is it to motivate the public service workforce to put a high level in terms of what they do, but when you look at it from efficiency perspective, I think they are not there yet in Nigeria. The service delivery is poor.
What about the private sector?
Private sector, yes, service delivery is more, because if your service is not up to speed, then you are likely to lose customers or clienteles. And when you lose your clientele, it's likely to impact negatively on your bottom line, and that then you will not be in business. So productivity and efficiency is a hallmark of the private sector, because if you can't deliver, then sometimes you may have to do the needful. That's the concept of hire and fire is more uppermost in the private sector.
So if for the public sector, the issue of efficiency does not really arise because of the way service is delivered, what are those issues that hinders efficiency within the public sector?
Number one, bureaucracy is taken to the highest limit. That's number one. Number two, the concept of recruitment into the public sector is equally challenging. Three, there are issues even in terms of the public service has a high body of intellectuals, but when you look at the middle level management in the public sector, the kind of work attitude that they project sometimes becomes challenging in terms of their deliverable. But in Nigeria currently, there are public sector reform. Once those reforms are put in place, then the efficiency that we're looking for may be achievable. But then if you look at the bureaucratic bottlenecks, the politics in terms of recruitment and the federal character principles are some of the challenge that has bedeviled the public service. But the government must make an encouraging decision to see how we can reform the public sector for optimal efficiency. Therefore, they need to reskill some of the workforce when they run size the public service.
All right, let's look at the theme for this year's celebration. The theme is ensuring safety and health at work in the changing climate. You discover that when you talk about welfare of Nigerian workers or globally, the attention is usually on the monetary side. Less attention is given to the issue of safety and issues that has to do with health. What's your observation in this regard? And how can a day like this be maximized to raise this advocacy for the issue of safety and health at the workplace?
I think safety and health issue is a greater component of the workforce. But then the challenge is that, particularly again in the public sector, issues of safety are not really taken seriously. But on the other hand, particularly in the private sector, there are some minimum requirements you need to operate in certain environment. Therefore, you must put safety and health mechanism in place as a major framework, particularly oil and gas, where safety is a big requirement for the workforce. Some of those safety requirements are put in place where the workplace environment, the safety conditions are put in place. Health facilities are there for the workforce to access. So I think the government, on the other hand, must improve on the health insurance scheme that can take care of the public service workforce, even dovetailing into some private sector initiatives so that people can have access to healthcare. But then the theme of this year emphasized safety in the workplace. Therefore, the Human Resource Department, where these things are domiciled with, must look at the Factory Act. All the safety requirements are put in place. Some state government, particularly Lagos State, have a safety commission that is responsible at looking at how safe the workplace environment is, and those who are regulators must see how they can penalize organizations that are not in line with the government provision in terms of safety in the workplace.
Now let's expand the talk about safety in the workplace. You understand that for some workers, they're on the field and not necessarily within the four walls of an office environment. Now, for those who are on the field, and as a theme for this year is ensuring safety and health at workplace in a changing climate. Now, they may be more exposed to the issues that come from climate change. What should be done to ensure that they are working in a conducive environment, even though it's on the field, and then their safety and health, of course, is guaranteed, not just for the public sector, but the private sector as well?
Yeah, I think the point that is being made for today is that even where people work beyond the office space, their safety must be taken seriously. So if you're working as a field worker and you need an official vehicle to do that, all the safety mechanism must be put in place in terms of good tires, the car in good working condition. Those things are part of the safety mechanism. On the other hand, because the climate change is equally impacting negatively on health, then you must take cognizance. So, for example, you have a high sunshine that might impact on the skin, so you provide some work equipment that will help to protect the safety of the workforce. So that is essential and is the responsibility of the Human Resource Department in line with the Factory Act. That's Ministry of Labor and Productivity. Then states where you have safety and health commissions must find a way to see that company provide for the safety within and without the office so that their health is guaranteed.
Now, people who mostly fall in the line of those whose work are not in the office and the field, you find traffic wardens, you find police officers, particularly those who are stationed along the express road. Some just manage to find some shade for themselves around the bushes. So bushes are close to the road. And when it rains sometimes and you travel past or you drive past, you can't help but feel pity for the condition under which they work. Now, on this day, if the conversation is about ensuring safety and health at the workplace, what should be done for people like that, their workers as well?
I think within the framework of those various government departments, you equally have safety and health departments. They were supposed to be provided with protective garments for those work, safety boots, garments, raincoats, and whatever were supposed to be provided. But more often than not, the government, in some cases, have failed in providing those safety. So a day like this, the advocacy should be that various departments of government, because we're focusing on those who are in public service, like the police, traffic warden, that are exposed to the climate on daily basis. So they were supposed to be provided with protective garments. So it's the responsibility of those departments to provide those things. Where possible, there should be some canopies that are provided so that they can shade off rather than having the negative impact of the rain or sunshine on them. So I think it's a failure in those departments. In other climes, when it's rain, you have them really robe in protective garments that will protect them from negative impact of climate. But then today is a day where the government can look at some of those challenges and see how they can possibly hit their personnel that are exposed to the negative impact of climate change.
All right, still in line with the theme, ensuring safety and health. Talking about health now, one of the crucial things to achieve that is when you have health insurance. And statistics have shown that a smaller percentage of Nigerians have access to health insurance. In fact, the bulk or the majority of Nigerians, they pay out of pocket to be able to access some of the facilities. Now, how do we correct this narrative on a day like this? The attention is being drawn to the need to ensure safety and health at the workplace. That's the first part of the question. The other part is when we talk about health, we focus more on the physical part of the body, or rather, we don't focus on the mental state of workers. In the workplace, shouldn't we have an arrangement where we also look at the mental well-being of workers at the workplace? That's the second part of the question.
I will start from the second part of the question. There's what you call work-life balance. What that means that your physical health, your emotional health, and even your intellectual health or your mental health must be in consonance with the way you do things. On the average, you should try to balance up so that stress management does not become an issue. So a balanced life is a canvas. So there are places, some work environment where the organizations has provided some form of incentive where workers during break can have access to some gaming activities. Some relaxation points are provided so people can recuperate to enhance their mental capacity so that there are no issues. So work-life balance is what is key. And the workplace environment has factored this into their policy framework, and that helps to balance that. On the other hand, when you talk about health insurance, particularly in Nigeria, there is this cultural inhibition to insurance. And I think that's one of the major challenges in the area of insurance, where God is my insurance. So people underplay the importance of subscribing to insurance. But then we need education, particularly on the part of government, to see how we can have more enrollee into the national health scheme. The minimum in terms of how much you can pay, I think, is reasonably priced. So we need high level of education advocacy where we can pull in people into that ecosystem so that they can benefit in terms of where there are issues of health rather than pay out of your pocket. If we're able to get to that level, then in terms of the mental well-being of the workforce, that will be sustained, where people that are challenged health-wise are to start looking for money to be able to access basic health provisions, particularly from the hospital. So the government has a responsibility to pull in more people into the net. The private sector already have a responsibility, as it were, where they provide health insurance for their workforce by making those contributions that help to place their staff in a better place. But the challenge again is you have to categorize what levels of health insurance you can provide for your workforce based on the levels or layers of management that they belong to. But in terms of the public sector, government can push that narrative so that we can get to a level where people can subscribe to health insurance.
You mentioned work-life balance a while ago. Let's talk about the rights of workers as it concerns breaks, off days, and leave. And now we do have, particularly for the public sector, paternity leave as well as maternity leave.
Yeah, when you always talk about workers' rights, there's this level of the debate. We always focus more on workers' rights. We should equally focus on workers' obligations because you have to balance it. When you talk about workers' rights, you equally talk about the workforce obligation to their employer, what you call employee-employer engagement strategy. So the rights of workers are guaranteed within the constitutional framework, and I talked about collective bargaining principles, which is one of the major rights of workers. If you talk about leave allowance, paternity leave, maternity leave, they are enshrined in the Nigerian labor law, and companies are under obligation to respect that. But when you go into a contract with an organization, the psychological elements are already enshrined in your contract of engagement. So your leave allowance, whatever level in terms of the contract, in terms of the offer, your own acceptance as a worker, and the considerations are already there. So, but then when you talk about your rights, you must equally talk about your obligation in terms of what you need to, in terms of your deliverable to the organization. That's the only way you can pursue your rights. If your deliverables are okay and in line with your contract or the contract they assigned with the organization, then you can pursue your right agenda. But the HRO department within any organization already have those elements and they deal with. If you talk about sexual infringement, those things are there. You have grievances, procedural handling. You have all the welfare package as provided in law. And all those things are already in the contract. But more often than not, when people have their letters of engagement, you don't really even look at that contract and see what is spelled out in that contract. So there must be a balance between the obligation of the workforce and the rights of worker, whether in terms of leave pay, whether in terms of minimum wage, are already spelled out.
All right, let's look at the big pie now, which is the conversation around minimum wage. It's been on for years, and if you follow the trend in recent times, a lot of Nigerian workers were expecting, a new minimum wage will have been announced on a day like this. Are you also equally disappointed? Interestingly, the Edo State governor has set the pace. He announced 70,000 naira. What do you make of this development?
I think I'm not disappointed because a committee has been set up by the president to review what Labour has proposed to government. But in my personal view, I think the money that is proposed is not sustainable, and I think is like acting that every organization within the country should close business. But whatever it is, when you talk about negotiation and bargaining principles, I think those figures are unrealistic, but then they are benchmark for the purpose of negotiation. But I think those numbers are far away from what an average employer, even government, can afford to pay, because we equally have challenge with the 30,000 minimum wage, where some state governments have not been able to pay. We know some state government in this country that are paying salaries on percentage, and I think that is not responsible enough on the part of those state government that are not able to pay. But then those state government has found a way. When he was commissioning a project yesterday somewhere in Ekpoba here in Benin City, a house built for labor, he made that he's going to pay 70,000. That's if it's sustainable for Edo State government, good. But then I'm one of those who is of the view that you cannot negotiate a minimum blanket wage. There should be a minimum threshold as a government what people should pay. Once you fall below those threshold, then there's a problem. But you cannot really ask people to pay specific amount. That should be subject to the level of negotiation with employers and in terms of contribution to those businesses. So I'm not really disappointed that it's not announced today. Let the committee come out with what they think will be in the best interest of labor, of government, and the organized private sector. It's just more than the labor movement. Labor should focus more in trying to see how they can provide social goods for the public workforce in particular. And we talked about public transportation and social housing. If we're able to have those elements taken care of, I think the demand for increment in terms of wage will be reduced substantially. But then it's within the right of the workforce to always demand for some level of increment. It's within their right, but then that right must be justified by the level of productivity and the deliverable they bring to the organization.
Right. Looking at it, that Edo State government has taken a step and declared what it can offer to the workers in terms of wage increment, 70,000 naira, an increase of 30,000 naira from 40,000 naira that the state was paying. Do you think other states should follow suit rather than wait for the federal government to come to an amount, do some sort of self-evaluation? What can the states pay as a way of talking to the workers and making them feel like your demands, government is considering your demands, and not making the conversation around wage increments linger much longer? No one can tell what would be the decision of labor after today if a new minimum wage is not announced by the federal government.
Well, I'm one of those who of the view that the concept of labor relation that has to do with protest, strikes in our climate, I think we have used those things too much. I think there are windows for negotiation. But to answer your question in specific terms, it is a responsibility of various state government based on their receivables and their payable to be able to determine what they can pay. So the government committee will just set up a minimum threshold by which no organization can fall below. So, like I mentioned earlier, negotiation, whether collective bargaining, whether contract negotiations, are within the purview of the employer of labor. The labor movement, from a union perspective, has the right to fight for the right of workers, but their fight is equally limited to the ability of employers to be able to pay based on what they have to offer. But then that minimum threshold in terms of what inflation, what we call COLA, cost of living adjustment, from time to time, if you pay a certain element of wage or salary, inflation will have eroded that. So you need to improve on that. Within that framework, it's right that we improve, but the kind of proposals that labor has put on the table before the government, I think to a very large extent, those figures are not sustainable, they are not justifiable, but for the purpose of negotiation, maybe they want to put that. So there's a principles in negotiation, splitting the difference. Maybe they are putting that to be able to have a win-win situation for the workforce. But in my view, protest strikes are not the best option, even though they are shrined in terms of labor relation or industrial relation. But the way we use strikes and protests are not really the best, but they can find other ways to open up windows of negotiation for the workforce.
I think that the the amount labor has fixed the minimum wage, which is 615,000 naira, as part of the reasons why negotiations around the minimum wage is delaying. I give an example. If you go to the market, for instance, and you ask for the price of an item, if you're giving a price that's maybe to you sounds outrageous, sometimes the buyer doesn't even want to negotiate. They feel like, where do I start from? Do you think that's part of the reasons why there's a delay?
No, I don't think so because even the committee was not properly constituted until about 2 weeks ago, if my knowledge serves me correctly. But the point is, there are always historical data when you talk about negotiation. So if you trace it back to 1971 or 72, during the Udoji wage salary review, up to the most recent time, there are certain percentage in terms of what you base your arguments on. So when I see that figure of 615,000, I'm worried, and Labour is not likely to pull this kind of proposal through. It's going to be very difficult for the organized private sector in particular to pay those kind of money that they are proposing. Number two, the companies are equally challenged, and most of them depend on diesel for production. And I can tell you that the price of diesel per liter is over 1,200 and something. Even with the recent issue now, you'll be talking about 1,500 or thereabout. So if you factor that into your cost of production, then you look at your labor cost vis-a-vis your cost of sale, you're not even going to think about break even, not to talk about profitability. So where does that revenue that labor is demanding for will come from? I think it's a very, very challenging time. The labor too must equally look inward and look at the core issues challenging the economy and focus more on advocacy on how the system can work better in the interest of worker, so that once the cost of production is sorted out, then negotiation becomes very easy in terms of the collective bargaining principles that they try to ascribe to based on industrial relation issues.
Now, still talking about the labor movement, you will observe that most of the time why the labor movement called for strike or they embark on strike is because they feel they need to compel the federal government to listen to them. But my question is, if the labor law says that the minimum wage should be reviewed after 5 years, why should the government be compelled to come to table to review it? It should be something that should be natural, organic, or statutory. What's your take on that?
No, I think they are not compelled. The Ministry of Labour and Productivity has already worked out based on that review, which is constitutional. So, but then maybe they've not come to a common ground in terms of what they think should be a reasonable pay across board. So that is within the purview of the government to say every 5 years, and that is what is being done currently. But the matter is before a committee. The president, within his constitutional mandate, has put up a committee to review what is on the table. It's after the review that we can come up with something that is reasonable. And that, once the review is done, is the responsibility of either the organized labor, organized private sector, or the public sector to say, okay, we've been on this pathway in terms of negotiation, then we have agreed X amount to be paid. So what you can do, you can take it backwards. So maybe the negotiation was supposed to be in January this year. So you just pay a difference of that salary to your workforce based on the time it's supposed to have come into effect. So I don't think we should be in a hurry. We should wait for the committee to do their work. And that committee is made up of every stakeholder. So I'm sure after all the negotiations, you have negotiators at the table who can now come to terms in terms of inflation, in terms of what should be done over a period of time.
But here is the perception to this argument, because the timing is also important. on a day like this, don't you think it is also strategic if the president is taking advantage of a day like this to set the conversation, announce a new minimum wage, just like the governor of Edo State has said, taking advantage of a moment like this? How
It,
strategic would that be?
no, that's just political expediency. These are labor matter, and labor matters are very serious matters. So you cannot score cheap political point for announcing a wage increase on a workers' day. The other strategic issues that has to do with the workforce. So if you want the government to say something in line with today, we talk about safety and health issues. So if the government is saying that we are going to increase the level of health insurance from 20% to 30% or 40%, we're going to build social houses that take cognizance of certain categories of the workforce in the public sector. That will make more mileage than just announcing a minimum wage on a worker's day. So it's beyond the minimum wage. And when we started this conversation, we'll talk about the monetary and the non-monetary elements of wages and salary. So we should not just focus on making announcements. Even if you make the announcement and people just have what you call a glitch of the moment, then at the end of the day, there's a challenge. So for me, political expediency may be important in terms of getting political mileage, but these issues are more serious than we think. So let the committee come out with something that is reasonable to all stakeholders. Then we can engineer the process towards productivity of the workforce that will enhance the national productivity.
But talking about health, isn't wage critical to health? At least that will provide good nutrition, which would also support the health of the workers. And if the committee is taking some time to put the proposal of labor in thought and then come up with something, shouldn't there be a time frame attached to it?
I think
Use
they
it
have a
later
time
on.
frame. No, they have a time frame. The committee have a time frame. So let's just give them the opportunity to do their work. When you talk about nutrition, yes, that's part of. Once you have a good nutrition, you have an enhanced health status. But again, the way you manage your resources is equally important. So, to what extent, what percentage of your income do you invest in terms of good nutrition? So those has to do with personal judgment in what you do with your money. But when you have a good pay structure, then your health scenario will improve radically in a way that you have a well-being that is sustainable for a long time. But then let's just give the committee an opportunity to do their work so that when they come out with a figure that is okay by the stakeholder, then we can advance the conversation. If it's not sufficient, then we'll look at the historiography of how the minimum wage has been calculated in the last 52 years or so.
Right. Now let's take a look at pensions. Now, while the scheme currently is contributory pension, the private sector is expected to key into it, which many companies have done. But you still find that it's not holistic. Some companies are still finding trouble key into the contributory pension scheme, and in that way, some persons in the private sector are not benefiting from that aspect. Now, is there like a standard set before a company can be part of the contributory pension scheme? How should it work, really?
I think there's a minimum requirement in terms of the number of staff you should have. The Pension Act already put that framework in place. So the contributing pension has two elements. The worker has to pay some of those elements. Then the organization needs to pay those elements. But then once you subscribe, PENCOM has a regulatory framework that check those who are not able to remit their contributing pension to the organizations that staff are subscribed to. But then the challenge here, again, has to do with even those businesses that are just trying to survive. They can't even break even first and foremost in terms of their own business plan. So there's a challenge. I'm not making a case that people should have disregard for the law. But then most of the companies are just struggling. But those who have subscribed, the other obligations to pay, and when those money doesn't come in, then PENCOM has the big stick to find a way to see how people can make those contributions. But the point is that the business environment must be improved upon so that businesses can thrive. And once businesses are able to thrive, then the issue of pension, whether contributory or other kinds of pension scheme that companies have access to, can be sustained.
How do we curtail this kind of trend where pension contributions are not being remitted? I'm still wondering why this still persists in some quarters.
Even the government, who is supposed to be supposed to show the light, a lot of state governments are owing people their pension, even where they have even deducted the staff component. They've not remitted to the pension service provider. I think is a major challenge in terms of our respect for law. So therefore, more advocacy should be placed on the government in particular to even remit their pension contributions to those staff that have subscribed to that. So once you have made the deduction, why can't you even make those payments? I'm even one of those who argue that even if you are constrained of even making your own part of the obligation, what you have deducted from the staff should equally be paid till you make your own elements of that money. So it's a major challenge in terms of how we do business. And I think it has to do with how we implement laws in our country.
What are some innovations that you think should come to be in terms of pension fund administration? Because even when the contribution is done by both the workers and then the employers, it is out of the reach of the beneficiaries for a certain number of years. What innovations should come up in terms of what the money should be used, why it is being saved, and access to the funds?
No, I think the Pension Act already stipulated the way you can administer your pension, because your pensions are a form of retirement benefit. Therefore, what the current Pension Act states is that on retirement, you are entitled to 50% of your contribution that you can take in bulk. So if you have maybe 10 million as a savings, then once you are signed out from your organization, your discharge letter has been given to you, you present that to your pension service provider, you are paid 50% of that. Then after that 50% is paid, then the remaining 50% is programmed for you that you cannot take on monthly basis. If you don't like that option of programming by your pension service provider, you can take that money to an insurance company that use what we call annuity scheme, where you earn slightly more than what you earn if your service provider help you to program that money. So that window has been provided by the Act. But most organizations and government in particular have often abused the Pension Act, where the 50% is not even collectible at the point of retiring from the organization. So the reform that should be made is that maybe reviewing the law to compel institutions, once people have their discharge certificate in terms of that they have retired or they go on voluntary retirement, then they should be entitled to their 50%. So we can rejig the law slightly so that people are compelled in a way that they can get their money. But if they fail to get their money, they can approach the industrial court. Once they approach the industrial court, looking at the merit of the case, they will compel those organizations to pay the money, because that's the court that is dedicated to labor, employment, and labor-related issues. But more often than not, most Nigerians don't even know the importance of approaching a court to seek a redress for an action that is not good for their retirement.
Now, let's revisit the issue of capacity to pay, whether to pay workers' salaries or to pay pension. It's something that is very crucial. Now, the argument on the parts of some people is the removal of first subsidy has given opportunity for allocations to various states to, has led to an increase in these allocations to various states. So would you say that the argument that the capacity to pay for minimum wage is not there is valid?
No, the capacity to pay...
Is it about the capacity?
No. The capacity to pay, just a moment, the capacity to pay is contingent on the contract between the workforce and the state. So even if they have more receivable from the federal post, there are other government issues that are calling for attention. So labor or wage is just one element of that relationship. So contractual agreements are essentially meant to be what you discuss with your employer. So, but we're not saying that a minimum wage cannot be discussed, but it's the responsibility of the employer to discuss with their employee on what they can pay them, but without going below the minimum wage that has been approved by the federal government.
All right, we'll leave the conversation here, even as ears are to the ground, waiting to hear what the federal government will announce today, maybe sometime today or in the coming days, or even weeks, regarding a new minimum wage for Nigerian workers. But thank you so much, Sam Orovwuje, who is Director, Center for Public Policy, for being on the show with us today.
My pleasure, Blessing. Thank you very much indeed. Once again, happy Workers' Day.
Thank you.
Early exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.